Hello and welcome to the show. Today I shall be interviewing Alexander Marsh, a libertarian socialist. Alexander, would you please like to introduce yourself for those who don't know you?
Sure. And thank you again for having me on, Mustafa.
Thank you.
My name is Alexander. I am the outgoing president of the Robert Morris University College Democrats here in Pennsylvania. I'm based out of the United States, and I'm very active in local political organizing in my state. I work very closely with local Democratic Party committees. And as you said, I'm also a socialist. I'm active in the Democratic Socialists of America, which, if you follow American politics, has had a lot of really important victories over the last few years. I also do some events with other third-party groups like the PSL, Socialist Alternative. I've even done some work with Freedom Road. So I'm very active in American politics from the left wing.
Thank you. And you describe yourself as a libertarian socialist. So could you
Yes,
explain what that encompasses and how it differs from normal socialism?
sure. So I think the main utility of the term, as with a lot of terminology you hear in kind of leftist spaces, is to kind of get people asking questions because in traditional politics, people hear that and they kind of short circuits their brain a bit because they ask you how can you be both a libertarian, which usually entails a very conservative economic policy, but also a socialist. So uh, I'll say in terms of policy, I'm libertarian in the I guess historical context of socialist theory. I don't think that even in an ideal economy, most of it should be controlled by the state. I don't believe in a control economy. So what you see in China or the USSR or similar Marxist-Leninist models. I think a socialist country would still have a free market for most goods and services, but instead of being governed by privately owned companies, they would be controlled by what are called worker cooperatives or eventually international worker councils. The free market is a very good tool for organizing our economy as long as market forces can actually regulate the cost of goods, which unfortunately they can't for certain things like food, healthcare, housing, and so on that do have to be controlled and distributed by the state. I would also say it's interesting because the term libertarian actually originates from left wing theory. The idea that it's a necessarily conservative ideology is a relatively modern phenomenon, what's called right libertarianism or propertarianism, where people really value the freedom of property, not of people. Um,
Yeah.
I don't agree with that.
I think a lot of people, when they hear the term libertarianism, they think of people who think that, government shouldn't be involved in anything and it should be all be private companies or individuals just owning everything. But with you, it seems like you have a total different spin on it. You're almost putting the worker at the center.
Absolutely, yeah. So that would be the libertarians of people like Rand Paul, Ron Paul, Thomas Massey, the U.S. Libertarian Party. And my answer is that those people prioritize the freedom of. I think there are some issues that I do agree with, the U.S. Libertarian Party and right libertarians on, especially gun control. I'm personally pretty opposed to it. I think gun ownership is very important. But I think that ideology tends to prioritize really the freedom of businesses, and businesses aren't really free at all. If you go to a workplace, the people who actually work there don't have a lot of say in how their place is organized. That decisions is made by the top down by the owners, people who usually don't have any stake in the business beyond making money from it. They don't work there. They usually don't contribute very much, certainly compared to the general workforce of the business. Um,
Yeah.
and as a consequence, I think that's it's not free, and I also think it's not a very functional economic model.
So that's very interesting. Why do you think so many leftists actually oppose free gun ownership? It seems like, well, I'm not American, but it seems like something that in America most right wing people are for and most left wing people are against.
Yeah. Um, it's an interesting issue. So the modern gun control movement is actually interesting. It originates actually with Ronald Reagan, who is perhaps one of the most notable conservative figures in American politics. He was president through the 1980s, and he was originally the Republican governor of California. And he started modern gun control policy in order to crack down on the Black Panthers, who were buying guns in order to defend the Black civil rights movement from conservative counterattacks. But yes, you're correct that the American, Democratic Party and American liberal parties tend to be very anti-gun ownership. Um, and the answer is that these are fundamentally corporate-controlled, what would be called in traditional theory bourgeois parties. They're not really interested in the systemic liberation of working people, and as such, They tend to discourage direct action. They tend to be just generally opposed to violence, even violence in self-defense, which is why they're opposed to groups like the Black Panthers. Democrats certainly weren't in the '80s. Certainly weren't, uh, you know, warm buddy buddy with groups like the Black Panthers or Weather Underground.
Yeah.
There also is a genuine problem with gun violence in the United States. Certainly, I'm not saying that the relationship that conservatives have to guns is necessarily healthy. They worship them as tiny gods, but it is still important to have widespread ownership, I think.
Okay. And in your ideal world, let's say if guns weren't so heavily um, almost cracked down upon, and if they were more allowed, how would you prevent large mass shootings while still allowing people to have the freedom to have these weapons?
Sure. Well, it depends what stage of long term utopian policy we're talking about. I don't think gun control. I think gun control has proven largely a failed policy at preventing mass shootings, or at least mass acts of violence. I think it's mainly caused by mental health issues. And there's a slew of policies you can pursue on that, especially when it comes to people being exposed online to violent ideologies and other things that induce mental illness. Groups like O9A and the Xena Satanist movement. I think that's the origin of what causes people to do mass shootings a lot more than gun ownership.
Yeah.
In a very long-term sense, I think ideally you would have collective ownership of guns in local communities. You would have, say, a local depot where firearms are kept, and whenever people need them in order to defend the community or the country, your political project from outside attacks, um, you would you would have collective access to them.
Yeah, that sounds like a very reasonable approach. I wanted to ask, are there any similarities between libertarian socialism and anarchism?
Yes, I would say I would say that's kind of where the theory originates, is a very critical look at the state as an institution. I personally agree with a lot of the descriptive and prescriptive claims of anarchist theory. I don't identify as an anarchist because I think that's an extremely utopian idea that's very difficult to pursue in any meaningful sense right now. But I would encourage people to read the theories of Mikhail Bakunin, for example, and similar anarchist theorists.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
I mean, a lot of people, when they think of anarchism, they just think of no laws is the best way. Why do you
yeah.
think so many people have this misconception when that's actually not what anarchism is?
Well, it's I mean, it's mass media. It's how it's typically pursued. When you see anarchists, like the Flag Smashers, for example, in what was the Marvel property that had them in the Captain America TV show they did. They have this very cartoonish portrayal that's extremely simplified, as they tend to do with a lot of left wing ideologies. You can see the same thing with radical environmentalism in the caricature of Poison Ivy, for example. But anarchists aren't, I mean, most anarchists, I should say, you can find wackos of any ideology. Most anarchists don't think we should have a society with absolutely no rules where everyone just does whatever they want. They just want a society without the state, without the government, because the argument being that the government represents kind of the ultimate form of violence. It's an institution with an absolute monopoly on violence, a legal monopoly on the ability to hurt people over a given area. Is tyrannical to the people within the border and to the people outside of it. Um, that being said, there are services and functions provided by the government that I'm not totally convinced could be recreated without it, which is why I'm not a full anarchist, just a libertarian.
So, in your work and in your political activism, have you had any overlaps with anarchists, and have you worked with them or with people who have anarchist views at any points?
Yes, actually, I will say. So I'm the outgoing president of RMU Democrats. Our current president is an anarchist. She publicly self-identifies as such, and I helped get her elected to the local Democratic committee in Allegheny County, and we're very proud to have done so. Obviously, she's not planning to dissolve the local government anytime soon, but I think that informs a very good understanding of socialist politics, which is something we can pursue at the moment.
So, you are the president of the RMU College Democrats. Could you briefly explain how did that happen and what does this organization do?
Sure, as I said, I'm the outgoing president, so I graduated about a month ago. But during my time there, the club used to be a lot more active. COVID really killed student activism for both parties just across college America. So we revived. My junior year would have been, I think, 2023, with Austin Wise, who's currently the treasurer of the national organization, College Democrats of America. And he left some leaders in charge who were not very interested in growing the club as anything more than essentially a campaign base for the Harris campaign. And I kind of took over. It would have been 2024. That's right. Was my
Yeah.
junior year
So what are your
or my sophomore
thoughts?
year.
I mean, so obviously you've graduated, so you're not part of this let's say organization anymore. What sort of stuff politically are you going to go on to do, and what sort of things do you see the RMU College Democrats doing that could be of meaningful political significance?
Well, personally, I feel that the model of college organizing I built at RMU is a great model for what the party needs to be doing with their youth wing, which is that I combine electoral work with the local party and with third parties, with direct action, protests, educational events, outreach, charity events with local fundraising opportunities and homeless shelters. It's that kind of very broad base kind of mass action that we want to see the Democratic Party transformed into, not just an electoral base to get people elected. Um, I think an important part is something that we developed was a platform, an actual set of policies we wanted to work towards and encourage politicians to adopt. I think that's something that the Democratic Party in particular is really lacking, which is any sort of positive vision for the future.
Yes, because a lot of the time I see that, for example, on the left or the Democratic Party, the almost vision would be to combat the right rather than their own vision. So, for example, it would be combating what people on the right are saying instead of having their own ideas.
Exactly. I mean, I think that was the entire issue with the Harris campaign was that the only thing she was running on was not being Donald Trump. We've been running on that since 2016 for going on 10 years now. Obviously, it is not a consistent way to gain power. And if you don't mind me commenting from across the pond, I think a similar issue you see in the UK, where you have left wing, the Labour Party, which only runs as not being the Tories, not being reform, when in reality, like the Democrats, they've adopted a lot of the right wing policies in this attempt to capture the imaginary middle voter.
Yes. I mean, on the right wing, you see, in America certainly, you see a lot of youth organizations like Turning Point USA or Young Conservatives or similar things. On the left, do the youth organizations have anything in common with the right wing youth organizations, or is the way they operate and capture the youth fundamentally different?
I would say the main thing they have in common is they're very populist. Obviously, I would characterize groups like Turning Point USA as fascist. In the most literal political sense, I think their objectives are openly white nationalist. And that would be the populist wing of the American right. And likewise, I think groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, and even college Democrats chapters compared to the National Party are very populist, very left wing, very amiable to socialism, or at the very least, strong social democracy policies.
So, would you
Um,
say if you're a non white person who's joining Turning Point USA, would you advise against that? For example, there are, of course, in America, people on the right who aren't white. Um, what would you say to them?
um, I find it surprising that to be honest, I mean, I think in a political sense, you're advancing policies that are harmful to you, but the racist right is actually very racially diverse. There are a lot of Latin white supremacists, especially in America. Nick Fuentes, Enrique Tarrio, to give two examples. Um, Racism is surprisingly racially diverse in America.
Yeah.
I think that sentiment comes from a lot of immigrants and a lot of Latin people trying to distance themselves from the cultural image of an illegal immigrant or an immigrant in general by performatively adopting conservative views, the way a lot of black conservatives like Candace Owens do.
So would you say they're almost trying to distance themselves from the image of them being illegal immigrants, or would you say often many of them are grifters and they realize they're doing it for the money? Is there a mixture?
I think to a degree it's both. It's an effort from a sociological perspective to become white, kind of the same way that Italians and Irish escaped the image. Italians and Irish were considered non-white for a long period of American history, and they only became white when they started adopting very conservative, socially normalizing jobs like law enforcement, for example, or business ownership. Which is why nowadays they are a much more, at the very least, politically moderate bloc compared to historically. And
I
I think
hear,
there's an effort,
yeah, go on.
at least among Latin conservatives, to do a similar thing. and it's been largely successful, especially in the South. There are, Latin Americans are no longer a inherently liberal voting bloc. I think in Texas, at the very least, they're majority conservative.
Yes, I've heard a lot of people say that, for example, it's wrong because they're voting against their interest. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's good to tell people who to vote for. They can make up their own mind, and it's their choice. But there is a risk, a lot of people say, that they're simply being used as tokens or as token
I mean,
minorities.
that is how I feel. I mean, if you want a good example of this, I think Ben Shapiro is probably the perfect example of why it's dangerous to engage in that sort of tokenism. Ben Shapiro has been the token Jew for the American right for so long, and now that Zionism is on its way out and it's being replaced by populist, fascist, anti-Semitism, he's starting to become very concerned over Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson and all these comments that they made. And it's like, well, you laid the foundation for this house. No offense, but I feel bad for American Jews, but I don't really feel bad for you as an individual. You made your bed and you made a lot of money off of it. Anytime you want, you're probably going to leave, just as Peter Thiel has done. He left for Argentina. I think in part due to the rise of anti-queer politics in America, and I expect Ben Shapiro will probably emigrate from the country sometime if we stay on our current trajectory.
What are your thoughts on the very sudden rise of democratic socialism, especially with people such as Zohran Mamdani winning elections with a very huge amount of support?
Extremely positive. I'm very happy to see it. I think this is kind of what I was hoping was going to happen in the wake of the 2024 election. There were a few years there where I was very worried the party was not going to take away the populist lesson they needed to learn from the failure of the Harris campaign. But, um, excuse me, it seems like fortunately they're being dragged into 21st century politics by the neck by DSA, and I'm very thankful for that.
So, do you think this is a small blip, or does socialism have a chance to become more popular in the greater scheme of things?
To be honest, I think if you talk, this is going to sound like a large claim, but I think if you talk to the average Democratic voter, as I do, as I spend a lot of time doing, socialism already is a lot more popular than moderate liberalism. Um, I mean, I would even say like just in rhetoric, but in term, a lot of people, I think there's been polling now that at the very least it polls comparable to capitalism within the party. Not because people are strong, committed ideological socialists, but because they recognize that moderate liberals are completely incompetent in politics.
So, you think neoliberalism is over in the Democratic Party, at least for now?
Absolutely, the era of Bill and Hillary Clinton is done. It should have ended a long time ago, but better late than never, I suppose.
I see like a lot of young people, when you ask them what politics they're for, you will see, and especially young men, you will see a lot of people, young men on the right, because the left, I think, doesn't really appeal to young men, or that's what a lot of people say. I don't know, that's just an opinion. And then there are, of course, young men who are socialist or quite on the left. And this is probably because they feel as if those on the right aren't good, or just their views aren't good or racist. But a lot of people are just disillusioned with the right and left kind of divide. So why do you think everyone's just going to the extremes or just disillusioned with the political system?
Sure, it's because traditional liberalism and traditional conservatism are internally contradictory ideologies. They both attempt to uphold both democracy, which is a system for distributing power, and capitalism, which is a system for collecting and maintaining power. And in pursuit of their own social agendas, either progressivism or social reactionary policies. Um, Democrats are unfortunately learning that democracy is not sustainable as long as capitalism exists. And Republicans learned a long time ago, during the Obama era, that capitalism is not sustainable as long as democracy exists. And unfortunately, in 2016, they kind of beat us to the populist moment. But now's our chance to play catch up. As for young men on the right, I do agree to an extent. I think the American left has kind of failed to provide an on ramp for young men the way that the right has. Don't get me wrong, I think that the incel movement is disgusting. But, you know, people aren't born with those, repulsive viewpoints. They kind of adopt them over time because they feel disaffected and disengaged from society. And I think only left wing policy is capable of addressing their concerns in society, but you still need to do some sort of outreach to them.
Yes, and there's been a lot of news articles saying that, there's a gender divide in terms of voting with young women being more on the left or more liberal and young men being more on the right. So why do you think this
Mhm.
is?
Oh, it's pretty simple. Most people's politics is formed through negative polarization. A lot of women tend to have a very negative experience with conservative politics at a very young age. They see these politicians on TV justifying systemic, justifying the Epstein scandal, the international pedophile cabal. The current U.S. president is a convicted. He raped and children. Um, Women, tend to be pretty negatively polarized by that. Whereas young men go on YouTube at a young age, they struggle to find left wing male oriented content, but they find people like PewDiePie or Asmongold, or not Asmongold. Asmongold isn't reactor. Who am I thinking? Am I thinking of Asmongold? I think so. The cockroach guy. Am I thinking of the
Okay.
right guy? You know
But
what I
so
mean. They find content that is for young men and explicitly reactionary,
tailor-made for
and
them.
that kind of brings them. Yeah.
So Donald Trump relies on a very large base of working class and poor voters. Do you think that socialist policies could appeal to these people and bring them away from the right?
Yes and no. I think there are a significant amount of people at the periphery of his voting base, swing voters who voted for him in 2024 out of desperation, out of just a last-ditch Hail Mary that something in politics is going to change. You see that in New York. There are a lot of people who were Trump Mamdani voters who used to support Trump, who then voted for Zohran Mamdani. I think even AOC has done videos where she's talked to um, Trump voters who are part of her voting base as well. That being said, I think there's kind of a event horizon to conservative politics where once you get sucked into the conspiracism and the anti-intellectualism, it kind of becomes almost impossible to pull you out of it. Um, I think a solid quarter of his base will probably vote for him in every election for decades and decades after he's died.
Yes, it's very interesting because you would think that the people who vote for Trump and the people who vote for Zohran Mamdani are totally different. But seeing someone who voted for that person and then for that person, it's almost as if they've just switched from one side to the other. But maybe it's just that the core message is the same, that we're going to be the best for your wallet and we don't want what's worst for you. We want to help you. And both of them have that same message, but they're saying it in a different way.
Well, they both are relying on negative polarization against the elite. People across the aisle recognize somehow that our system isn't working and that it was intentionally constructed to benefit a small minority of people at the very top. Obviously, Trump has pulled off an enormous stunt of convincing people that he's not one of those elitists. I still don't understand how people fall for that, but at the very least, that is uh, a rhetorical note that he's ingrained into politics and that socialists can take advantage of in a way that moderate liberals cannot.
I think maybe there's something in the element that he is hated by quite a lot of the other people who I suppose you could call them elites or you could use any term. And a lot of people despise him or dislike him, and he would use that as a sort of a selling point that I'm an underdog and I'm with you.
Certainly, he was not very popular among the Republican Party elite when he was first running in 2016. But the difference is, and what I hope the Democrats are willing to do with the DSA is that once it became clear that he was the future, that he had the populist energy that the party was missing, they all rallied behind him. Even fierce critics, people like Ted Cruz, for example, or Marco Rubio, have since immediately fallen in line. It is what the Democratic Party needs to do with people like Zohran Mamdani.
Do you think the left has shifted too far into identity politics and cancel culture?
Um, Identity. So I do have a lot of criticism of identity politics, but I'll preface it by saying that it's one of those words like woke that has been overused and abused so much that it doesn't have any consistent meaning anymore. Like when conservatives complain about identity politics, what they mean is like just social progressivism in general. Um, that being said, I do have a problem with identity politics in the sense that I think a loud minority of people on the left are way too deferent to the idea of a person having an oppressed identity to the point where they'll adopt or tolerate very reactionary politics when they shouldn't. To
Yes.
give a an example of this, there's been discourse online surrounding body donation or organ donors and the whole conspiracy theory. There's a big conspiracy in the U.S. that if you sign up to be an organ donor, that doctors will kill you and harvest your organs for profit. Complete nonsense. But there are people on the left who will accept that idea just because a lot of people of color happen to buy in on that conspiracy. They'll be how could you talk over voices of color who are concerned over this completely nonsensical phenomenon? I think during COVID there was a thing with when it came to anti-vaxxers because there are a lot of people in the Black community who are distrustful. Not a lot, I should say. It's not a majority, but a loud minority of people who are anti-vaxxers, who are afraid of the medical institutions. And I'm sorry, but that is irrational, and we shouldn't tolerate it just because the people who express those ideas just happen to be Black.
Okay. Yes. So I feel like the left, for example, if they were to garner more voters, um, I think you shouldn't vote solely based on the identity of the person who you're voting for. For example, oh, this person is my ethnicity, so I'm going to vote for him. Something
Yes,
like that
absolutely.
shouldn't be encouraged, and you should vote for them based on economic policy or just common sense.
Yes, the Democratic Party does have an issue of I'm trying to think what the polite way to term. There's a term for it, but essentially the idea that um, ethnic groups or ethnic minorities in large cities or large voting blocks are entitled to a candidate of their ethnicity, regardless of their policy. This is something that Jasmine Crockett ran out. Jasmine Crockett's campaign in Texas was obsessed with identity politics. How and how she was Black and James Tallarico was white, and the only reason anyone wouldn't want to support her campaign is because they're racist against Black people. When ironically, she actually made some pretty racist comments about Hispanic voters in Texas. So yes, that whole line of thought needs to be expelled from the party.
Could the left be missing out on a lot of voters who like their policies but do not like the overemphasis on political correctness, including working class voters?
Mm, I think it's hard to say because unfortunately, I think a lot of people who were negatively polarized against the left during what would be called like woke 1.0 during the first Trump administration, people whose only political belief is that they like saying retard. I think a lot of those people have been kind of negatively polarized and they kind of fell past the event horizon, where nowadays they're totally bought in on so many conservative culture war issues that, well, I do think the left needs to kind of let up a little bit, needs to get dark woke a little bit, needs to be a little bit more comfortable being rash and abrasive to our opponents. Um, I don't know how many of those voters you can capture again, or you can capture at all.
Yes.
I think if somebody's first priority in politics is the ability to say slurs or laugh at Smiling Friends episodes, I don't think they were positioned well to be a left wing to participate in left wing politics, anyways.
Yes, I don't think, for example, that if you want to win people over, you can say that, oh, we don't mind you saying slurs. It just doesn't have to be in terms of appealing to voters. A it doesn't have to be a thing where you're almost like we we do not tolerate anything that is slightly out of this boundary. So maybe just becoming a little less tight on that.
Like Graham Plattner, I think is a good example of this. Graham Plattner, if you've been following his Senate campaign in Maine, is problematic. Is the term I think a lot of uh, people would have used back in 2016. He is a former Marine. He has made some very horrible comments on Reddit and in long in his past. He had a totem conf tattoo when he was serving in the military that he since had removed. Um, but he has, in my eyes, demonstrated that he has changed as a person. He has grown. He no longer holds the kind of reactionary sentiment that he expressed so long in the past. And I do think it's important to forgive people like that. I don't think we should exclude people just because they used to be reactionary or they used to have served in the military. I don't think you build a political movement that excludes all of those people.
An alarming amount of laws banning under 16s from social media and regulating the internet very strictly are being proposed across the world. How do you view these laws?
Extremely negatively. I think it's very dangerous. I think it demonstrates a political establishment that has given up on winning over young voters and is just trying to block them out of the political process altogether. In the UK, they have horrible mass censorship laws, partnered with Palantir, which is Peter Thiel, obsessed with the Antichrist. And yeah, I think the calls coming from inside the house there. A deeply evil person. You have flock cameras going up all across the US. You have Palantir centralizing all this data from the federal government in preparation for the Kids Online Safety Act to pass. Um, I will say, I do think there's a case to restrict young people's access to social media and cell phone usage. I just don't think the current implementation is, I don't think it should be done through mass centralization and data harvesting.
I
I
mean,
don't think kids should have cell phones in school, and I don't think kids at the very least younger than 13 should be on social media. I think that's a pretty reasonable floor. Um, I certainly, I don't think that's healthy, but I don't think that should be accomplished by requiring everyone to provide IDs to a central government agency, so that all their online activity could be surveyed and tracked and used for future, you know, behind the scenes shenanigans.
the way I see it is that if you ban teenagers from the town square and conversing and talking in the town square, then they're going to go into the more dark and dangerous alleyways to talk where there's no regulation. So instead of pushing them into the less regulated areas, why don't you just regulate social media better? My next question is that you are a Christian and quite religious. How did this influence your politics, and do the two beliefs ever clash?
Sure. Yeah, as I said, I would consider, I guess, a practicing Catholic. I believe in a lot of the um, theology of the Catholic Church. I was raised Lutheran and confirmed Lutheran. I haven't undergone OCIA, but religion influences my politics very heavily. I developed my religious and my political identity kind of in tandem during the COVID pandemic. I was in a pretty bad place given the politics and the social, state of the world in 2020. And that was a period where I both became very religious and became very socially progressive. And I think it's criminal how the American right pollutes the teachings of Christ. I don't think American evangelical Christianity has anything to do with the original teachings of Christ. It's about as far away as the Church of Satan is, in my personal opinion. Now, obviously, there are some people in the very far left that are very hostile to religion. There is the, kind of anti-theist, Reddit atheist trend that you see in left-wing spaces. And I won't pretend like I've never received hostility for my religion in socialist spaces. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is, firstly, I do believe that Christianity is descriptively true, but also almost everyone in America is religious. You cannot build and that's not going to change. Atheism is on the rise, but it's not going to overtake any country anytime soon. You cannot build a political movement that is categorically hostile to religion.
Yes.
That's just not possible.
So we have the clock is ticking and we don't have too much time left, but I'm going to quick fire through some more light-hearted questions. What is the most capitalist thing you own?
The most capitalist thing I own. Um, I'm not really sure how to answer. I don't understand how I guess an asset can be capitalist. I don't own any stock.
I suppose an
Um,
iPhone.
I guess I wouldn't
iPhone.
I would consider assets produced under capitalism to be capitalist. It wasn't, Steve Jobs didn't make my iPhone, the workers did. I
Yes.
will say I have a pretty well developed cookie clicker save file. I would say it's the most capitalist thing I own.
How much money would it take for you to wear a suit that says "I love capitalism" for one day?
Hmm. $600.
Oh wow, okay. So, um, you're not too expensive, I would say, because a lot of other people
Just
would do
for a
it.
day, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it wouldn't be like you mean it. It would just be in jest.
No.
If you became a billionaire by accident, how long would it be before you gave it all away?
Oh, I wouldn't. I would invest it into the market, and I would use the dividends to fund DSA candidates and direct action groups across the country.
Yes,
Um, I would
because
I would be yeah.
a lot of people
I wouldn't
say,
give I wouldn't give the money away. I would reinvest it. I would use it to build cooperatives, groups like Mondragon or perhaps the Zapatistas here in America.
would you keep at least one yacht for yourself?
No, I don't like boating.
Okay. What's one
I wouldn't
opinion
even buy
you?
a car.
Oh, okay. What's one opinion you have that would get you kicked out of a room full of socialists?
Um, hmm. Let's say I've gone over a lot of it. Something we didn't touch on is I think the I think socialists would be a lot more critical of the USSR. I don't consider the USSR or modern China socialist in any meaningful sense. I guess that would be modern China is not socialist and should not be categorically admired. There were some successes from the USSR and from China that should be examined, but on the whole, they are not models we should try to recreate here in America or in the Western world. Or you know what? I'll tell you what. Here's a better one that I actually think would probably offend a lot more people. I think there are some things about America that are uniquely great compared to any other country on earth. I think birthright citizenship, I think our libertarian spirit, I think certain elements of our political organizing system are better. So, in a sense, I am an American exceptionalist.
Okay, well, that's it for today, and thank you very much.